Good morning, and thank you for the privilege of being here. I'm reminded of three faith leaders who were discussing what they hope would be said about them at their funerals. And the first one said, "Well, I hope that I will be remembered as someone who was gracious, who looked after the poor, who gave a good sermon." The second one said, "Yes, I hope that I too will be remembered as someone who was generous and and caring of the widows and orphans." And the third one said, "Yes, I hope at my funeral people will say, 'Wait, he's still moving.'" In her book, Journey to Heaven, exploring Jewish views of the afterlife, Leah Bronner begins, "I have often heard people say that Judaism is a faith concerned with life in this world, not a religion that dwells on what we might expect beyond the grave. Yet every culture and probably every individual has at some point asked, what happens after we die?" This talk will explore three main topics. First, the practice of ritual washing before burial in the Jewish tradition, then in the Islamic tradition, and third, it will look at some differences and similarities. On the 27th of April, 2011, I was the second person to arrive at the small mortuary connected to a 35-year-old pastoral cemetery next to a horse farm at the end of an asphalt paved lane in northern Greater London. Just beyond was a residential neighborhood. It was the most recently opened cemetery of the 365-year-old Spanish and Portuguese Jews congregation of the United Kingdom. The community has older cemeteries which can be found in the East End of London and also in the borough of Barnet. We waited for the two other male volunteers called lavadores, meaning washers in Portuguese, before opening the black vinyl bag of the body lying on the porcelain table in the middle of the room. There was an overhead hose and a separate sink on the left-hand wall, as you can see in this photo. An acrid odor filled the room, perhaps to counter its impact. An extractor fan was running, and there was an additional air cooler for circulation. It was 1 p.m. We had 45 minutes to prepare the deceased for the Jewish funeral scheduled at 2 p.m. I was there to assist with what is called tahara, a Jewish purification rite, under the supervision of more experienced elders. And while not part of the required tuition for a new rabbi, it was a sacred task I was told I needed to learn. This was my first time in a room with a dead body, certainly someone I had never met, and instinctively I felt frightened. We took off our jackets and dressed in waterproof aprons, latex gloves, and goggles. In preparation, we filled 3 metal jugs of water, 3 large buckets of water, and we used some wood shavings to fill 3 small rectangular linen pouches to serve as a triangulated headrest inside the coffin. The other 2 volunteers having subsequently arrived, the most senior member of this group called the Hebra Kadisha, the Holy Society, stood at the head of the mortuary table and recited the opening prayer. The body was removed, the deceased was undressed, any soiled clothing was disposed of, and the now naked body was covered with a sheet from head to toe. Treatment of the dead required every degree of dignity and respect that would be shown were that person still alive. Effort was made to ensure the eyes of the deceased, known as the Met, were closed. We worked in silence to perform a practiced ritual that dated back hundreds, if not thousands of years. In keeping with laws of modesty, tahara is performed by men for a man and by women for a woman. The tahara rite, I learned that day, begins with a prayer that our work be carried out with purity of intention, of kavanah. The leader then instructs volunteers in the contiguous pouring of the 3 small jugs that I mentioned over the head and upper torso, then a hygienic wash, including soaping, rinsing, even combing the hair, and making sure the body was clean and free of any discharges, including blood, phlegm, urine, and even feces. Hands and toenails are cleaned and trimmed if necessary. Now, in the Jewish tradition, blood, hair, and nails are wrapped and put inside the coffin, all else discarded. Then the gloves are removed, and volunteers quickly rinse their hands for a ritual purification, putting on a new pair for the next part of the rite. With two volunteers lifting the sheet slightly, a second washing takes place with a continuous flow of 3 buckets containing roughly 11 liters of water in total. They start with the volunteer on the right side of the body, pouring it onto the head and continuing down to the feet of the Met. A volunteer on the left side follows, pouring the second bucket beginning from the head and on to the left side. And then the person on the right side returns to finish with a third bucket in the same fashion. While the water is being poured, the 4 volunteers repeatedly chant a formula seeking forgiveness of the deceased's sins. The body is then dried and dressed in simple shrouds. In death, all are treated the same. The dressing begins with a face covering, a hood, a chin strap to keep the mouth closed, then a shirt, trousers, and finally for men, a jacket and cravat, and for women, a shawl. I have a sample shroud pack if anyone wants to see what it looks like during the break. Both genders have a small quantity of sanctified earth called terra sancta, sprinkled on the eyes and separately on top of the genitals after the trousers are fitted. Additionally, for a man, strings from a talit prayer shawl are wrapped around the middle finger of the left hand, and while the dressing is occurring, the volunteers recite other scriptural verses. Fully dressed, the body is ready to be moved from the table into the coffin. Once again, for a man, that prayer shawl is draped across and over the upper edges of the coffin, so when the deceased is placed inside, it is covering the shoulders. And at the very end, a waist sash is tied for both men and women in a special manner to form one of the letters of the name of God. Having finished, the volunteers request forgiveness from the deceased one final time and place another small amount of terra sancta in the coffin. Then they remove their protective gear and resume wearing their normal attire before members of the family arrive. Finally, the coffin is covered except for a very small space at the top. It is left unsealed for family members who will enter before the funeral to offer their final farewells to the loved one and add some sanctified earth as well. The coffin is then ready to be taken to the cemetery prayer hall. Just one small variation in a cemetery that has a full-size mortuary. What occurs, instead of pouring the 3 buckets, the body is moved by a mechanical lift and fully immersed in a mikvah or a ritual bath, as can be seen in the photo in the center. A brief digression about the community I am part of. The Spanish and Portuguese Jews congregation was formed in 1656 by those fleeing the Spanish Inquisition and seeking refuge in the United Kingdom. It is alleged that perhaps 35 Sephardi Jewish families, Sephardi being defined as those coming from Southern Europe, Northern Africa, or the Middle East, were already resident in England at the time, but in 1657, they petitioned Oliver Cromwell for permission to freely practice their religion and to bury their dead. Tahara has been performed in the Anglo-Jewish community then for more than 3.5 centuries. The earliest manual known as Ma'avar book, which addresses rituals for death and burial, was first published in 1398. The title refers to a story of the patriarch Jacob, who crossed a river in preparation for meeting his estranged brother Esau after 21 years of absence. Here is a facsimile of the frontispiece of the 3rd edition printed in Amsterdam in 1730, and on the right is the text from the 1845 UK edition. Now, not long after my experience in 2011, I was inducted into the Society for Lavadores and Lavadoras. Tahara training occurred by rote. That is to say, one attended and followed the lead of the other volunteers who have been performing tahara for years or even decades. There is a vetting process to make sure that the brothers and sisters of the society can endure the experience both physically and also psychologically. And there is a vow of confidentiality that is part of the induction process, not to confide to others anything they might have seen during tahara. Volunteers are registered on a contact list, and at each death of a community member, a call goes out via text or more recently via WhatsApp with the date and time for the tahara, asking volunteers for their availability. The first four to respond are confirmed. In days of old, when it was common for people to die in their homes, the washers might have gone to the deceased's house to perform the ritual, as you can see in the text on the right from the 1845 edition. When life became more industrialized, though, it was common for cemeteries to build mortuaries on their premises. Now, notwithstanding complex medical or legal issues, or the delay that might result from relatives traveling from far away to attend the funeral, in Jewish practice, burial is meant to occur either within the same day or as quickly as possible. Seldom is it delayed more than 48 hours. Exceptionally, there are cases where tahara cannot be performed in its entirety, such as, for example, traffic accidents where a body is badly mangled, autopsies, or contagious diseases. In such cases, a symbolic effort is sufficient. Jewish-owned cemeteries are closed on Saturdays and religious festivals. Otherwise, burials can occur all other days of the year. In 2020, due to the COVID pandemic, the mortuaries were closed, and tahara was performed only in an abbreviated or symbolic manner. It did not resume until after July of 2021, when the first wave of volunteers had received their vaccination. Now, I have not attended a ghusl preparation, ghusl meaning the Islamic tahara rite before burial. But the first time I learned about this ritual washing was in 2018 when attending a multi-faith panel discussion about death hosted by the Bushy Interfaith Forum. There, a member of the Shia community in Stanmore described the process that left me pondering how could these two faiths that sometimes have much enmity between them share so much in common. Ritual washing and speedy burial are just two such examples. From 2018 to 2020, for my sins, I was appointed the head of the Society of Lavadores and Lavadoras. And in 2019, during our AGM, we organized an evening of dialogue and exchange with volunteers from the Stanmore Mosque who came and did a demonstration for us of ghusl. In Islam, ghusl becomes obligatory for numerous causes, but the one I want to focus on is called ghusl mayit, which is performed on someone who has passed away. Islam lays great emphasis on physical and spiritual cleanliness. Physical cleanliness is considered necessary for all acts of worship to be meaningful. The concept of cleanliness is extended to the preparation of a body before burial. Since Islam emphasizes the preservation of the dignity of the deceased person at all times, it requires that a body be washed and cleaned thoroughly and in a specific manner. This ensures that all Muslims will be prepared for their last journey in an identical fashion, regardless of their social or economic status. Few things are needed for ghusl. They are designed to maintain as sanitary and clean an environment as possible, and that includes water, preferably warm, soap, surgical gloves, disposable masks and shoe covers, a roll of cotton, towels, clean cloth, the kafan, which is the shroud, perfume, and powdered camphor. Now, I won't expect you to read what's in this particular slide, but I will go over a step-by-step description of the process of ghusl in Islam as it was taught to me. We begin with the right intention. We place the body of the deceased on a washed and disinfected table for ease of access. The deceased person's clothing is removed carefully and discreetly, taking care to respect his or her privacy. At no time during the process should the aura, of the deceased be exposed. That's the genitalia. It may be mentioned that the aura of a male consists of the part of the body from navel to knee, while that of a female consists of her body from neck to ankles. The process includes pressing on the stomach of the deceased gently and massaging it downwards to evacuate the bowels before the ghusl is started. Then working under the cover, under the covering of the body, the waste is washed away discreetly. One changes the gloves and then wraps a piece of clean, wet cloth around an index finger and gently wipes inside the teeth and the inside of the mouth. That piece of cloth is then discarded. Small wads of cotton are used to plug the ears and nose to minimize the possibility of water entering during ghusl. A thick pad of cotton may be placed over the mouth for the same purpose. Additionally, one can use a free hand to shield the face during the washing. There is something which is called wudu, which is, as I understand it, it's the ritual ablutions that occur before prayers. So a similar format is done for the deceased by washing the right hand and then the left hand each 3 times, cleaning the mouth and nose from the outside, shielding the mouth, nose, and ears with a free hand, washing the face 3 times, washing the right arm from the elbow down to the fingertips 3 times, then the left arm, similarly, washing the right foot from the ankle down to the toes 3 times, and then the left foot, using warm water and soap to wash the body thoroughly from head to toe. Usually 3 washes are sufficient to adequately cleanse the body, but if it's necessary to wash more than that, the Sunnah of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, requires an odd number of washes. Having 1 or more helpers turn the body on its left side helps to soap that part of the body, and then using soap and warm water to wash the right half in the opposite way. The body is gently turned on all occasions, right, whether right side or left side. And then finally, the whole body is washed with water only, making sure that it is cleansed of all foreign matter, including soap. 5 minutes. It's okay. The body is patted dry with a towel discreetly, again, working under the covering in deference to the privacy of the deceased. And then finally, perfume or camphor is applied to the body to add to its overall sanitary condition, and specifically on parts of the body that touch the ground during prayer services. And then finally, the body is transferred to an adjacent table where the kafan has already been spread out in the prescribed manner. Special circumstances may have to be addressed during ghusl. For example, despite all precautions, body fluids may sometimes be discharged from the deceased, which requires a special treatment. And then cases involving accident victims, autopsy, or contagious diseases, etc., are situations requiring special handling and precautions where an expert would be able to suggest prudent lines of action compatible with Sharia, with local laws, and with legitimate health concerns. A separate table is used for dressing the deceased in shrouds. For men, 3 pieces of cloth are used, and in line with customs of modesty, for women, there are 5. It is expected that family members of the same gender of the deceased will assist with part of the ghusl. Once the body is dressed, effort is made to conduct the funeral as quickly as possible. Now, in both Judaism and Islam, the effort for speedy burial is paramount. Special arrangements are in place in many corners offices to expedite the required documentation to facilitate burial. And in the Jewish tradition, the soul which is separated from the body is distressed until going into the grave, after which it can begin its journey to the world of souls. What is of interest to me is the recitation of prayers in both traditions to accompany the soul on its journey. There is not enough time to go into the idea of Jewish eschatology. That I will leave for some of my more erudite colleagues, but some of the concepts that are relevant include resurrection, immortality, reincarnation, the world to come, and the Messianic age. In the remaining minutes, I would like to point out some differences and similarities between these 2 traditional pre-burial washing practices. I believe it may already be obvious to some of you in the audience. In Islam, family members are expected to assist with the ghusl, whereas in Judaism, only non-family members assist. Camphor and other fragrances are used in Islam, where only water is used in Judaism. In Jewish practice, the blood, nail clippings, and hair are buried with the deceased. In Islam, they are not. The kafan is a flat piece of cloth in Islam and not tailored into a clothing style as it is in Judaism. And finally, the body, when being washed, is placed in relation to the Qibla for Muslims rather than towards Jerusalem for Jews. Similarities include having the right intention and reciting prayers at the start. Both use a water-based purification ritual, and a hygienic cleaning is done for the hair and body. Maintaining the dignity of the deceased, and particularly covering the private parts, is carefully adhered to. Both use simple shrouds. Both have special circumstances for cases if the body is impaired, and both require that those performing the ritual are of the same religious affiliation. Equally interesting is the similarity between words in Hebrew and Arabic describing the deceased, the purification process, the covering of the areas of modesty. And so, in conclusion, like many research projects, one begins with many questions and hopes to find some answers. Inevitably, along the way, more questions arise. For me, areas of further interest and study would include gaining a better understanding of when pre-burial washing rituals were first adopted. And separately, the Torah lists a law concerning the para aduma, a red heifer, which, when translated by Sadye Gaon into Arabic, when the Torah was translated into Arabic in the 10th century, became known as the yellow cow. The mystery of para aduma in Judaism is that the ash of the burnt cow, mixed with sacred water, purifies the impure, but contaminates the one administering it. So the notion that death contaminates the living is shared by both the Jewish and Islamic religion. After this brief study, I'm left wondering, how did our two separate religions develop so many similarities in ritual custom and in law? Finally, in thanking Sheikh Mohammed Reza Tajri and the Al-Mahdi Institute for the privilege of presenting this morning's talk, I'd like to close with a simple thought. For more than 10 years, for 12 years, I've been performing tahara in the United Kingdom. In the initial silence before the ritual begins, I've grown accustomed to listening to the body in front of me, trying to understand whether the soul that is nearby is at peace or is distraught. Today is about finding meaning in our traditions that we can share with each other. And so I want to just conclude with an interesting and remarkable statement in our rabbinic literature. From the Babylonian Talmud, it says that when a fetus is forming in its mother's womb, an angel teaches its neshama all of the Torah, which includes the wisdom of the universe. But just before birth, the angel taps the child on its upper lip, creating this philtrum, and all is forgotten. And so our journey through life is a process of rediscovering all that we intrinsically once knew. It is said that when our days are finished and our souls return to their origin, the first encounter is with that instructive angel who will show us how we spent our days. It gives us a profound meaning to the idea of accountability. Thank you very much.